Good morning and welcome to Michelle Smith, legislative candidate from District 33. Thank you, Michelle, for joining us for our virtual legislative candidate meetings. My name is Gina Ragland, and joining me today is Susan DeCamp, Volunteer State President, and Advocacy Lead Volunteers Joyce Beck and Bob Lassen. We also have joining us this morning Jan Farneson, an AARP volunteer and District 33 constituent. Michelle, we appreciate your taking the time to meet and discuss issues of importance to the 50-plus voter and their families in Nebraska. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be shared with AARP members across your district prior to the election. So to begin, Michelle, if you want to start us off by giving us a little background about yourself and your campaign, and we're aiming to keep that at 5 minutes or less, that would be great. And then once you've completed your opening, we'll move into the questions. So I'll hand it back to you, Michelle.
Thank you. I'm Michelle Smith. I'm running to be the common sense local voice in District 33, working together to restore the good life in Nebraska. I was born and raised in Hastings, raised my son here, and I've been a business owner here for 10 years now. That's my reason for running. I'm a mental health therapist specializing with abused and neglected children. And in the last 4 years, I went from not having a waiting list to being overwhelmed with the need for mental health care in our communities. And that's not acceptable for the people of District 33 to not be able to receive the health care they need when they need it. So that's my number one priority in the state legislature, is addressing the mental health need that has skyrocketed the last few years. And along with that, I'm also very passionate about healthcare in general. Our assisted living facilities are closing, our nursing homes are closing, our rural hospitals are on the brink of closing. And again, that's not acceptable to me or for the people of District 33. I've lived here my entire life, and I've never been at a point that we are now. So I decided that we can do better, and I can be that voice addressing the issues facing the people here in District 33. And not only do we have a shortage of mental health care, medical care, we're also facing a shortage of all professionals. Here in Adams County, we went without a public defender for months. Obviously, that wasn't okay. That was very challenging for the people who needed those services, and that the law requires that they receive. Everyone's entitled to a defense. And so unfortunately, that was very challenging for a lot of people for a long amount of time. A lot of people aren't aware, our DHHS office was actually kicked out of our county building here in Hastings. So our DHHS staff working with the abused and neglected children couldn't even hold a team meeting. They couldn't even print things off that they needed to print off because they didn't have a space for a period of time for over a year. The state did end up giving them a little construction trailer out at the old Hastings Regional Center, but they were actually over capacity by the fire marshal. So it was a very bad situation. Pipes were freezing. Again, I had never seen things like that in my entire life, and that was not acceptable. And no one was doing anything about it, which isn't okay. And then the housing need is also something that's very important to me. I had a therapist hired from Lincoln to come and work at my office. I hired her. She was just looking for a little small apartment. She was an older single lady. She didn't want a lot to clean, just kind of something nice, and that was attainable for her. After months of looking for housing, I ended up losing her because there wasn't housing available in the city of Hastings for months. Obviously, that's not okay, and that's not how we address the workforce shortage. So we have to have that housing available. So, in conclusion, that's why I decided to run for state legislature, because we have a lot of really real issues that are facing the people, from older people who, like our retirees, who are needing assisted living facilities, nursing homes, medical care, to our youngest, most vulnerable population, where I've seen an increase in abuse and neglect and haven't been able to provide the services for those very young children and their families. So I would be honored to be the common sense local voice working together on these issues facing the people of District 33.
Thank you, Michelle, and I appreciate your passion. I appreciate what you bring and your experiences, and which are obviously not as fortunate as we'd like them to be, but that rural perspective is very important, and so we appreciate that. We're going to move now into the question portion, and we again will allot about 5 minutes for each of the questions. We have provided you with a set of the 3 questions pertaining to the 50 plus in Nebraska, and the issues that we're bringing today are issues that we hear from our members, that these are important, and that's why obviously we're bringing them to the table to have the discussion. So starting off with question 1, health, caregiving, and home and community-based care, Joyce Beck is going to take that. So go ahead, Joyce.
Good morning, Michelle. Thank you for giving us some of your time. I too have a passion for healthcare, as I have been in healthcare for over 50 years. So I share what your passion is for healthcare too. 84% of Nebraskans over 45 say that staying in their homes as they get older is extremely important to them. Home and community-based services and area agencies on aging become important assets to caregivers as they care for their loved ones. Home care not only meets the needs of the loved one, but it also provides relief for an already strained long-term care industry. So, Michelle, I have 2 questions for you. The first one is, what would you do to protect or expand the home and community-based programs, particularly recruitment and retention of a sufficient workforce and adequate funding for the programs and services that older Nebraskans and their families rely on? The second question is, what will you do to support the 179,000 unpaid family caregivers in Nebraska?
Yeah, those are definitely great questions. As to start with your first question with the home-based care, I definitely think that's very important. I have aging parents. They are in their 80s, and that's one of their passions is they want to be able to stay in their home. And so obviously as their daughter, I want to make sure to help them do that. So I definitely think in-home based services is the key to doing so, so people don't lose their homes. I want to partner with our local colleges and universities, build those programs to help address the workforce shortage in that area. We used to have Creighton partner with Hastings College, but now we have Bryan, who partners with Hastings College to train our medical staff here in rural Nebraska. So I definitely want to make sure that we continue to build on those programs. So we have trained nursing staff, CNAs, med aids. Central Community College does a great job getting our CNAs and med aids trained. So I definitely want to build on those programs and make sure they have solid funding that they need to be able to meet the need to get new staff trained. I also, as I was talking to voters in the district, one of the things I found in Kearney County, specifically in Axtell, is they had funding for Meals on Wheels, but they weren't able to access those services because they didn't have anyone just to pick up meals and deliver them to the people. So obviously that's something easy that we can do. We can get somebody hired and make sure we have those meals being delivered to the homes. Not only does that affect the retiree, but it also affects the entire family. That daughter had quit working to take care of her mother because, something simple like Meals on Wheels wasn't being delivered, even though she had reached out and found out they had funding for the program. So we definitely need to make sure that we have those jobs being filled. We're supporting our local economy, providing training for the workforce so that way we do have those home-based services. And then as far as our unpaid workers, I know that's been a challenge in the state of Nebraska, a very disappointing challenge on my end, because the legislature did, uh, increase funding for family members and things like that so they could get paid. But from my understanding, it's been hard for them to actually receive the payment from the state. So, I mean, as much as we can, cutting red tape, making sure that family members get paid, that other workforce staff, that agencies get paid. I think that's big. As, a therapist, I work with Medicaid and things like that too, and it can be a nightmare to get paid and all the documentation requirements we have. So we need to make things easy. I mean, I'm a trained professional, let alone just a family member who is trying to balance everything to take care of their aging loved ones. So we want to make sure that that's as easy and attainable as possible.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle, and thanks for the question, Joyce. Our second question, Michelle, comes from Susan DeCamp on consumer fraud, exploitation, and protections. Go ahead, Susan.
Good morning, Michelle. Nice to meet you. So scammers are increasingly targeting older adults with scams like wire transfers, the gift card scams. I'm sure you've heard of the grandparent scam where they have someone call and say they're a grandchild and they need gift cards to help them out. And there's been occurring new scams involving real property lately. So nationwide, the average victim of elder fraud lost nearly $34,000 due to these crimes in 2023. And in Nebraska, the FTC showed that there were 4,643 fraud reports made. And nearly 9 in 10 consumers agree that lawmakers need to do more to protect consumers from fraud and scams. So with that in mind, our question for you is, consumers lose billions of dollars each year to online, financial, property, and other types of fraud. What will you do to address and ensure that Nebraskans are protected against fraud and deceptive or unfair business practices and provide opportunities for redress for victims of fraud? Would you support enacting laws to require merchants that sell gift cards to post notices? Would you support enactment of a consumer fraud restitution fund? And would you support implementation of preventative measures to assist in combating owner and seller housing impersonation fraud? I know that's a loaded question.
That's okay. I'll start with your yes and no questions because that's the easiest answer. Yes, I would definitely support all of those measures and legislation. I definitely agree it's vital to protect everyone in our communities and keep our communities safe. And of course, our retirees, our aging population, we definitely need to protect them as well. Again, I have aging parents, so I am very familiar with fraud. I've had to, go over to my parents' house when I get a phone call from my mom saying, "Hey, I need help. I got this letter in the mail." And so I've had to go over there, and some of those look really real. Um, and I've even had to question some of the letters my mom received in particular. Like, what's going on? Is this real? Is this not real? Because it was actually, that letter was a service she actually had, but the letter itself was fraud. And I was very frustrated on my end because my parents did go to the police department and, tried to report that. And then they were just told, well, there's nothing we can do about it. And that was extremely frustrating on my end because thankfully I'm in the area. I live in the same town as my as my parents, so I'm able to help with that. But I know not everyone is as lucky to have a family member nearby who can help, with those things. So I definitely want to support our law enforcement so they can do things to address fraud and schemes. When that kind of things happens. I think part of it's not even just our local police. I think it's involving our state patrol because I know our state patrol is more involved with like the dark web, the black web, and things like that. And I think a lot of those scams are coming from, the dark web. And so I think partnering with our state patrol is an answer to that as well, supporting our local law enforcement, our state patrol to be able to address those needs to protect our retirees and Nebraskans as a whole.
Great, thank you for your very great insight on that.
Thank you, Susan, for question number 2. Our last question, Michelle, is on, we're going to shift now to housing, livable communities, and obviously keeping people in their home. So helping people stay in their homes and communities, and Bob Lassen will take that. Go ahead, Bob.
Thanks for being here today, Michelle. AARP's goal is to allow people to age in place and stay at the lowest level of care and cost of living. To that end, I'm going to address the question in 2 different ways. The zoning, that we have problems with zoning, and the property tax. Both of those things create housing problems for our group. Zoning obstacles allow just single-family residential homes. In these communities, zoning does not include other types of homes, such as auxiliary or accessory dwelling units, ADUs, manufactured homes, intergenerational duplexes, apartment buildings. All of these may be better options for the seniors. The second thing that's causing problems is property tax. This is the most burdensome tax for many homeowners and low incomes and older residents. To this end, we have social homestead exemption, but we want to be sure that that's in place. So the questions are: Nebraska's over 65 are the fastest growing segment of our population, and research shows that most want to remain in their homes and communities as long as they can. As costs of housing continue to increase, older adults are unable to find housing to meet their needs when seeking to downsize, and thus are being pushed out of communities and homes that they've lived in for generations. What will you do to support, incentivize, and ensure the creation of affordable and diverse housing options, such as these accessory dwelling units, intergenerational houses, manufactured housing units, and townhomes? And the second part of that, will you fight to ensure that the homestead exemption program is maintained and protected to ensure that older Nebraskans that qualify continue to have access to the tax relief program that allows them to age in place?
Yeah, I'll start with the homestead exemption because that's one that's near and dear to my heart. My parents do qualify for the homestead exemption. So, yes, I will absolutely support and fight to maintain the homestead exemption, and not only to maintain it, but also to expand it. I do think property taxes is especially a burden for our retirees on fixed incomes. As prices are going up, they have less and less money to um, be able to even go to the grocery store and buy food, let alone pay property taxes that are continuing to go up as property valuations are getting out of hand. So the homestead exemption is a great program to be able to help our retirees to be able to stay in their homes. Like I said, my parents are able to take advantage of that. It's actually, it doesn't make sense completely how it's set up because, for example, my parents own 4 lots in Hastings. And the homestead exemption makes it so they don't have to pay property taxes on 3 of the 4, but then they're left paying property taxes on like 1 lot, which doesn't make sense. If you qualify for the homestead exemption, then it should include all of your property, not just a portion of your property. And I've heard that from some other retirees who I've talked to as I've been out in the community as well, that it'll cover up to a certain dollar amount of their property, but then after that, it's not covering it. So we definitely need to, again, not only keep the homestead exemption in place, but we need to expand that. Um, as far as intergenerational things go, I think that's really with our farmers where I think we need to make it easier for farmers to be able to pass on, their property from one generation to another. So really making that easier, and then retirees may be able to continue to live in the family farm while just kind of passing it on to other family members to actually do the farming. Or whatever that looks like for them. I've talked to some retirees who just rent out their farms to other people. Some would like to pass it down to their family members though too. And as far as zoning goes, I have friends who serve on the Planning and Zoning Committee here in Hastings. So I definitely want to partner with our local elected officials too. I've heard that's something that's somewhat been lacking here in District 33, is there hasn't been good communication between the different levels of government. We can't just do everything at the state level. We have to partner with our local elected officials too, whether it's our city council members or planning and zoning committees, our local school board members, our mayors. So I have been talking with our local elected officials. Some of them are my friends, some of them I've just met through my campaign, but I've definitely been reaching out and communicating with all of them. One piece that can help with it too is cutting some of the red tape for the TIF funding. Here in Hastings, our theater district was able to get some housing in place, but getting that funding can be challenging from what I've been told by some of our local community members who really use that TIF funding. It can be really hard to get. Nebraska has some of the highest regulations in the entire United States, and they weren't exactly sure why. For example, some of our local city council members even voted no to get some funding here in Hastings, specifically for housing, because one of the requirements to get that funding is we have to deem some of the areas as blighted. And people don't like that. People don't want their neighborhood to be considered blighted just to be able to, get the housing and the funding that we need to address the housing shortage. So I definitely want to work on that. That piece specifically, I don't think there's any reason we should have to deem an entire neighborhood blighted just to get the funding we need for housing. So that's a specific thing that I would like to do to address that piece. I've also met with, I'm not sure his exact title, it might be housing director, but I could be wrong there, out at Good Samaritan Village. And so they offer some what they consider to be independent housing. Out in that community. I mean, we're very blessed to have Good Samaritan Village here in Hastings. They just do so much for aging community. So that is considered independent living, but they also have like some joint spaces with pool tables and things like that. So I've met with him, to talk about what they need to increase the housing out there in that community and also be able to serve our entire communities as well.
Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate your comments and your answers to those questions. Those are the 3 very loaded questions that we had for you today, and I appreciate your insight and answering all of those. We are coming now to the end of the time of our meeting, so I do want to give you a couple minutes back Before we close things out, if you have anything you want to talk about, you've kind of discussed already some of your priorities for serving in the legislature and why you're coming to and campaigning for that. But do you have any closing comments that you'd like to make back before we close out the meeting?
Yeah, I am a fifth generation Nebraskan. My great great grandfather actually came to Hastings after serving in the Civil War. So it's been passed down from generation to generation, the importance of bringing people back together. I believe I am the person to be able to do that, especially with my background as a mental health therapist. Is literally my job to listen to people and to resolve conflict, whether that's within families, marriages, things like that. So I strongly believe I am the person, not only with who I am, but also my family values that have been passed down from generation to generation to really address the division that is unfortunately a barrier to getting things done for the people of District 33 and Nebraska as a whole. We just saw that in our special session. People couldn't get things done because we forgot how to compromise. Those are things I teach like my littles that I work with in my office. So I'm definitely looking forward to being able to bring those common sense values back to the state legislature to be able to work together and get things done to restore the good life here in Nebraska.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle. Thank you again for taking the time to visit with us. We wish you the best with your campaign. And again, thank you for meeting with AARP today. Take care.
Thank you,
Thank
Michelle.
you so much.
Thank you, Michelle.